Okay, David, go.
All right, we're ready?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining us for this online forum. And it's a big change from most of the forums we do, so please have some patience with us as it doesn't run as smoothly as we hope all the time. We're all learning on this. Originally, we had this set up to do a forum for the Housing, Land, and Zoning Committee to address the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019. But obviously, with the recent pandemic changes, we thought the HLZ committee felt it was necessary to address the concerns that are really impacting you as a community, get you the right information, and hear what's going on in the legislation from the elected officials themselves, as well in general. As well as legal information in general, advice from attorneys that are practicing housing laws day and night for us. I don't want to express, I do not want to stress that I can't express more that what's explained legally from the attorneys is in a general sense. So while we understand you may have specific questions related to your specific situation, we ask you hold those questions for another time, and or if you need any general help, I'm sure that Manhattan Legal Services or somebody from our committee could direct you to get some of that information. So again, keep those questions very general that you may ask. So here's a rundown of the format and tentative schedule. Keep in mind we have to get a little fluid with this. We're going to be starting from hearing from Senator Michael Gianaris, who represents Western Queens in the 12th Senate District. He is a sponsor of Senate Bill 78125A, which relates to suspending rent payments for certain residential tenants and small business commercial tenants, and also certain mortgage payments for 90 days in response to the outbreak of COVID-19. And he will explain a little bit more details what that bill he's proposed means. We will then hear from Jerome Frierson, who is a supervising attorney in the housing unit at Manhattan Legal Services, as well as an adjunct faculty member with the New York Law School's Housing Rights Clinic. He's been instrumental in helping us put this forum together, so thank you again, Jerome, for all your help. Followed by some words from our very own Borough President, Gail Brewer, and our beloved State Senator, Robert Jackson. Closing up on the content of the forum will be Kevin Duffy Greaves, who is an attorney that works on Jerome's team to discuss his specific expertise regards to housing. And again, I'm sorry to stress enough, but please keep your questions in general. There's a Q&A button on your screen that you can ask a question. And one of our experts, i.e. April Tyler, our co-chair of Housing, Land, and Zoning, will answer it maybe directly, or we'll hold it to the end if it's pertinent to the crowd. And also want to thank Signe Mortensen, who's running the show behind the scenes as our host for the evening. Even though you may not see her, she's hard at work in the background. So now I'll turn it over to CB9 Chair Barry Weinberg to say a few words before we get started.
All right. Thank you, everybody who is dialed in, and I won't.
Please, just for a sound check.
What did you say, April?
Can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Can we just make sure that people are here?
Well, you're actually cutting in and out a little bit.
So maybe it's just me.
Yeah, I think it's you. I think it's Kate.
It's just me. I'm sorry.
Okay, Barry, why don't you go on? We'll see if there's any problems.
Sure. So thank you again to David for organizing this, volunteering to take it on back in, I think, February, and then helpfully pivoting when the pandemic hit and we couldn't do an in-person forum. So, you know, we are all trying to scramble and understand the new environment we're in. Many people in our community have lost their sources of income and are struggling with their rent and their housing expenses. And the governor and our state government have taken a number of steps to try to help renters and homeowners during this crisis, but it's not always clear to everybody how that exactly works and what is going on, which is why we're having this forum. I am also very grateful that we have not only our own State Senator Robert Jackson, who has been a tremendous advocate and champion for tenants' rights since being elected to the State Senate in 2018, but also the Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris from Queens, who was also a crucial advocate for the Tenant Protection Act in 2019, and also has been advocating recently for new revenue streams for the state to help pay for some of the pressing issues like transit and affordable housing upgrades, which is an issue that the community board, maybe I think first in the city community board, had called for at the beginning of this budget season. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. I know our borough president will be dialing in also while we're here, and I want to thank Jerome and Kevin from MLS for kind of explaining everything, what's going on to us, but for kind of the perspective on how our state legislature is going to be looking to take additional steps to help tenants, homeowners, and other residents in New York. I will turn it over to State Senator Michael Gianaris.
Great, thank you. And first of all, let me say that anyone who's listening or on this call, I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy, and this horrible pandemic hasn't affected you all too much, even though it's affected everybody. Let me also thank you for your service as a former community board member here in New York City and Queens many years ago. I know what a valuable role that community boards play in our civic life, and doing things like this is a perfect example of how communities stay informed and in touch through your work. I'm going to talk a little bit about the housing situation and where we're at and what we can expect in the next few weeks from your representatives. I introduced the bill that you asked me to speak about back in March when things were still very new as it relates to this, and I was getting complaints, as I'm sure many people in your communities are also concerned about the ability to pay rent at a time when the government has ordered the shutdown of large swaths of the economy. So for people that live paycheck to paycheck, and then the government has suddenly said, well, you don't have a paycheck anymore because we have to shut down your place of employment, it was a real crisis for these people. The state did establish an eviction moratorium, which is still in place for another month and a half or so, which means that no one can be evicted during this time, but your obligation to pay rent is continuing to accrue. And so unfortunately, or fortunately, the governor initially said that he thought that took care of the problem. More recently, he's recognized that more needs to be done because there's a recognition that at the end of this eviction moratorium period, for people that were unable to pay their rents in April and May and probably in June coming up, there's no way they're going to suddenly find 4 months worth of rent in July and be able to pay all of it at once. And so what we're trying to do is stave off a rash of evictions by the thousands, which could occur if we don't establish guideposts and rules that prevent that from happening. And so, excuse me. And so what I proposed initially, and this was before any federal stimulus was in place, was if we're freezing people's ability to earn a living, let's also freeze their largest financial obligation, which tends to be their rent. I understand that there's some homeowners who would struggle without receiving rent, and so we also added a provision to the extent we legally can do this in the state to also forgive mortgage payments for the same 90-day period for landlords that would be facing a hardship without the rent payments. That part is trickier because we don't really have jurisdiction over federally backed mortgages. The federal government has to deal with that. We do have the ability to regulate state-backed mortgages, which are, from what I gather, a minority of the total mortgage population. It gets more complicated because mortgages also get bought and sold by funds. Anyway, we recognize also the need to do something for particularly the smaller homeowners. And so that bill has generated a tremendous amount of activity, discussion. It's probably why I'm on this call with you all tonight. 23 members of the Senate are publicly in support of it. 32 is a majority of the Senate. Now, since the bill was introduced, there was a federal stimulus, which added the supplemental unemployment insurance of $600 a week. And so there was an ongoing discussion of, well, what is a proper approach, given that people are now receiving some amount of money, even if it's greatly reduced from what they would normally make if they're unemployed. And so we are now engaged in a process where I can tell you, I believe the legislature, at least the Senate, which I can speak for, is going to do something to provide rent relief, something significant. I just came off a 2-hour call where we are still trying to reach consensus on what that is. Senator Jackson, who I know is your local representative and a terrific colleague, is in that group that is having this discussion. Senator Kavanaugh, who's our housing chair, is heading it up. And so we're hopeful that in the next week or two, in the short term, the Senate at least will present something that will provide real relief for renters who are frankly in a panic about what they're going to do now that already April is past. May, when the numbers come out, we expect will be worse than April in terms of on-time rent payments, and it's only going to get worse and worse until we turn the corner and reopen the economy. And so we are dedicated to doing something. At the top priority for me at this time, and I know a lot of my colleagues share it. I can tell you that Robert brings it up every chance he gets and says that this is a critical issue for him as well. And we're getting close to having something, at least the Senate will propose, that the Assembly has to get on board. Ultimately, we have to convince the governor to sign it. But what we've seen in the past is when the two houses get together, it really moves things. The entire 2019 legislative session was a story of the Senate and Assembly getting together and driving the agenda. So we do have the ability to do that. I think I've called for the governor to do by executive order whatever he can. He's focusing on the health consequences. I get it. That's priority number one. But priority 1A, as far as I'm concerned, is helping people deal with the economic catastrophe that's now falling down on our shoulders. And hopefully we'll get his support for some faster action. I don't know, Barry, if you want me to take questions or where we go from here, but that's kind of the lay of the land, and happy to talk through any of it with all of you, and thank you for having me.
That's very helpful. I think I will let David and April kind of moderate the back and forth here.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's specific I mean, do you see any? I mean, obviously, without the Senate's not in session right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm hesitating because I mean we're not in session as we speak. This is my home you see behind me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But we are not out of session in the sense that we've adjourned for the year. We do have the ability to meet and convene remotely. We changed the rules of the Senate back when we passed the budget to allow for that possibility. So we all expect that we will be back in session legislating within the next few weeks.
Okay, I'm with the, you know, in committee right now, the actual bill that you were speaking of, do you see any movement possible, or what? I mean, what are your feelings? I mean, obviously you can't speak in specifics, but are your feelings that
I have confidence that something is going to get done. I don't know if it's going to be that specific bill or a variation. The process that I referenced earlier that we're engaging in is really about what can we come up with that enough of the Senate can get behind that we can pass it. Oftentimes, the legislative process works this way. Somebody puts in a bill, builds up support. Other people have ideas on how to modify it. The facts on the ground change from introduction to passage. And so it's not at all unusual that there would be a modified version of something that emerges. And so I think that's what we're looking at here. And I'm trying to make it as close as possible to what I introduced in terms of the final product. The approach that I've taken on this is we have a tremendous need. There's going to be economic loss as a result of this. Right now, all of that is falling on the people at the bottom of the economic ladder, the people who need the money the most, need help the most. And I'm trying to come up with proposals that shift that burden up to the bigger players who can handle it, whether it's the banks, the big insurance companies, big real estate. These are the entities that tend to get bailed out. A decade ago, we saw it when the banks got bailed out and the everyday person in this country got screwed. So I'm trying to say, let's start by protecting the people at the bottom. Then let's move up to the second rung and deal with the homeowners who might be smaller and need the help. Let's push as much of this burden up as we can because ultimately it's the fairest way to do it. And it's better for everybody because it's not going to be great for anyone in the real estate industry if we have tens of thousands of eviction proceedings all hit us in July or August or whenever this moratorium eventually expires. And so I'm trying to impress upon people that the best thing to do for everyone in the community is to protect people's homes right now. And the movement to cancel rent exists because people can't pay their rent. It's not so much an ideological effort, although there are some who view it as such, but it's really just a matter of people can't pay. If you can't pay, if you don't have money, you can't pay. And if you can't pay, your rent is going to be canceled because you're not paying it. Either you're going to be evicted because of that, or someone's going to provide some help so you get to stay in your home. And that's really what we're dealing with.
And for the record, the Manhattan Community Board 9 passed a reso supporting the bill, which is, I think it's Senate Bill 8125, I want to say off the top of my head,
Yeah,
or 82.
8125.
But we, you know, recognize that this was imperfect and not enough, and that, you know, we didn't expect people to have the right solution immediately, but even, you know, piecemeal things have helped. The eviction moratorium is obviously not enough, but it was a really good start that I think at least bought some breathing time. So I see a number of questions, you know, in there about possible changes to the bill or a timeline for passing the bill, which I think people are interested in hearing if you have any details. But, you know, we also recognize that we're not expecting perfection, but we are hoping for an additional step soon.
Yeah, this is very speculative, but if you're asking me what the time frame is, I'm very hopeful we do something this month before June 1st rolls around. And again, what that end product will look like, I'm not sure. I think, as you correctly pointed out, right now people just need any help they can get. And so I'm happy to do whatever we can in the short term and then keep working on solutions. You know, I've had questions even out here in Queens about co-ops and condos and how is this going to affect that situation. And I think it's something that we recognize this is not a problem that only affects one group of people. We're going to have a lot of work to do. But like I said just moments ago, let's start by helping the big swath of people who clearly need the help the most, and then let's keep moving and doing more and more as the need arises. And by the way, the easiest answer for this that would solve the problem is the federal government just comes in with a stimulus package specific to housing, you know, pays everybody's rent who needs the help, and everyone is made whole. The problem with that approach is I can't, as a policymaker in New York State, sit there and count on Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump to sign on to that kind of approach. And I'm not going to just cross my fingers and hope they see the light. We have to do what we can at the state level to provide help in the absence of that. And then if that comes through, then that would be wonderful.
So, April Tyler here. So, I'm monitoring the questions. So, the timeline and also is there a assembly same as for your bill? And in terms of the 8190 affordable housing bill that's proposed by Salazar, how does that jive with yours? And are you all working together to try to make something become more cohesive so that it works for everyone?
Yes, there is a same as bill. Assembly member Yuli New, who I think is outside your catchment area, is down in Chinatown. She has introduced the bill in the assembly. And absolutely, yes, Senator Salazar and I are working closely together. We support each other's approaches. And the process I discussed under Stuart Cousins, who's our majority leader, is a tremendous consensus builder. And she often forms these work groups of members to come together and develop a consensus around ideas where we might all share the same goal but have different ways of getting there. And that's the process I referred to that we're engaged in right now. Like I said, I hope that we come to some kind of consensus on a Senate proposal in the next week or two, and then pass it. I can't speak for the Assembly on whether they support whatever we come up with and what they're going to do. And the governor seems disinclined to do very much on this, so we've got our work cut out for us. But at least on the Senate side, which is a group I can speak for, I think with some level of confidence we're going to do something significant in this space.
Okay, and so we've got now 55 people on on here, and we've had probably 25 questions. So how can we help to get this moving forward? So that
And let me just say too, unfortunately, I've got another one of these in 5 minutes. So I'm going to have to jump off myself, but people can always be in touch with me, and we'll try and answer questions. And I'm sure Senator Jackson would be happy to play a role in that as well. The question is, what can you do? Keep the pressure on. I mean, you have me, you have Senator Jackson. I think anyone that directly represents you is probably on board, but pressure your assembly members, any senators that are not fully supportive, let them hear from you. And if you have any influence with the governor, that would be terrific too, because ultimately he's going to have to sign on to whatever we come up with.
okay.
Okay.
Let me just before I know you've got another engagement, but let me just check the questions and answers again. Oh, no. We're not so worried about people taking advantage of it. We want people to take advantage of it, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. So how can a question that has come up with, and in addition to being the co-chair of this committee at the Housing, Land Use, and Zoning Committee, and a member of Community Board 9, I am also a founding member of the HDFC Coalition, Housing Development Fund Corporations, the co-ops. And one of the questions that has come up with us is, why are we in 8109 Senate bill required to sign a 40-year regulatory agreement to sign away our grandchildren for temporary assistance when others are not? And we would want this stricken from that bill in order to support the passage of it, which we generally support.
I'm happy to circle back to you on that. Just give me the bill number again, so I have it.
8109.
Okay. I will take a look at that and circle back to you guys on that.
All right. Thank you. And thank you so much for your time. And
thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for taking your time out of your schedule, and good luck on your next next conference call.
Next Zoom. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Great. So now we're going to turn it over to Jerome, from who's Manhattan Legal Services, to give us a presentation and explain some more things on housing that they're seeing with the CARE Act and some other things.
Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
yes.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about, well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be able to share this information. I think that, amid this crisis, there's a lot of information and I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding of what rights exist for homeowners as well as for renters. So this is, I think, a great opportunity for me to just answer some frequently asked questions that my office is seeing, and also just to disseminate this information widely. So thanks again for inviting me. Definitely feel free to invite me for future trainings on additional issues related to maybe HDFC co-ops and the HSTPA. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Jerome Frierson. I'm a supervising attorney at Manhattan Legal Services. I'm also an adjunct faculty member with New York Law School, the Housing Rights Clinic. I'm here with Kevin Duffy Greaves, a staff attorney in my unit. And so again, today we're just going to talk about housing rights in the age of COVID-19. This presentation is legal information and not legal advice. So, to the extent that, anyone has questions, I would like for the questions to be saved to the end of the presentation. But again, the questions should be general because we're only providing information today and not advice. If you do want legal advice, if you do want representation, our office is still, our advocates are still working, right? We're still all working remotely. We're still available to answer questions and even provide legal representation to the extent you might have an existing or pending case. So the number is right on this slide. You can call us at 917-661-4500, and someone will be available to answer the phone through Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Again, the phone number is 917-661-4500. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started describing a little bit about my organization, Manhattan Legal Services. We are the Manhattan Borough Office of Legal Services NYC. We fight poverty and seek justice for low-income New Yorkers. For almost 50 years, we've challenged systemic injustice and helped clients meet basic needs for housing, income, and economic security, family and immigration stability, education, and healthcare. We have 600 advocates citywide, and we help more than 70,000 New Yorkers annually. And so I am a supervising attorney in the housing unit, but we have attorneys who practice various areas of law. So we have attorneys who represent people who are disabled, education attorneys, immigration attorneys, consumer rights, employment attorneys, family law attorneys. So to the extent that your legal issue is not a housing issue, again, you can call our office and speak to an attorney, 646-442-3100. I'm going to get started with the CARES Act. So one frequently asked question that falls under the CARES Act is, are there any special housing protections for renters who reside in federally financed properties? And the answer is yes. These renters are protected under the CARES Act. CARES is an acronym which stands for Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. It's very expansive federal legislation enacted by Congress on March 27th of 2020. And for our purposes today, we'll only cover the immediate rights that renters and homeowners or co-op shareholders have as a result of this legislation. So under Section 4024 of the CARES Act, it imposes a 120-day federal moratorium on new eviction filings based on non-payment of rent in covered properties. So this applies to any and all renters who live in covered properties, regardless of the regulatory status, of your tenancy. That means if you are rent stabilized, if you're rent controlled, if you live in a market rate apartment, if you live in a brownstone, if you live in a condo, if you are a renter in any of the covered properties, then your tenants, you cannot be evicted under this 120-day federal moratorium, or you cannot, your landlord is prohibited from filing an eviction case against you during this moratorium period. So again, the effective date of this act is March 27th, and it's scheduled to expire Saturday, July 25th of 2020. So again, it only applies to cases that were based on non-payment of rent and related late fees and surcharges. The lessor of a covered property must wait until the expiration of the moratorium to serve a 30-day notice. So even after 120 days lapses, landlord still has to give 30 days notice before filing an eviction case for non-payment in housing court if you live in a covered property. What is a covered property is the next question, right? If you live in a property that receives any form of federal funding, you live in your tenancy is covered under the CARES Act. So this includes NYCHA tenants, Section 8 tenants, and includes all buildings that have mortgages that are federally backed, such as Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I have a long list of all of the different types of subsidies that are included. So again, project-based Section 8, NYCHA, low-income housing tax credit, Section 202, housing for the elderly, so on and so forth. So these are a number of the types of tenancies that are included. This information is not always easily accessible, and thus I advise consult an attorney. If you think that you may live in a building that is a covered property, I would strongly suggest you speak to an attorney so that you can get representation, because again, your rights are stronger under the CARES Act than under other laws. So federally backed mortgage loans are defined to include loans secured by any lien on residential property. So that includes co-ops and condos and brownstones having units, having 1 to 4 units, and that are made in whole or in part, or insured, guaranteed, supplemented, or assisted in any way by any officer or agency of the federal government. So housing attorneys and advocates nationwide believe that this means that even if you live in a market rate apartment, if your building has tenants who receive Section 8 vouchers, your market rate tenant, right? You pay maybe $3,000 per month, but there's another tenant in your building who receives a Section 8 voucher, then you may live in a covered property. So this is, again, a reason why I would say it might be worth it to speak to an attorney if you are facing eviction post-pandemic, because these are legal arguments that attorneys can make on your behalf. And whenever legislation is passed, whether it's federal or local, provides an opportunity for lawyers to make legal arguments and you know, interpret statutes in ways that best fit their client's interests. So again, you might want to consult a lawyer if you're facing eviction. Here's another frequently asked question. I believe that my building may be receiving some form of federal financing. How may I determine if I reside in a covered property? Again, consult an attorney. Ways that I would do it, they're in New York City, you can conduct online research. We have what is called the Automated City Register Internet System, or ACRIS. And so this is public information. Public records or property transaction records are publicly available to anyone who goes on this website. So, you know, if necessary now, we might be able to determine if a property has a federally backed mortgage loan by reviewing the contents of any mortgages, deeds, trust, or instruments. Again, this information doesn't necessarily appear online, but it may. And so ACRIS is the place that I would personally start my search. Another way that you can find out if you live in a covered property is enhanced pleading requirements. So housing advocates believe that in light of this federal statute, there are enhanced requirements for landlords when they bring cases against you. So that we believe they may be required, they may have an affirmative duty to plead whether the building is covered under the CARES Act, and the failure to disclose this information may result in a dismissal of your case. And finally, you might have right to discovery. In other words, during dependency of a non-payment lawsuit post-pandemic, you may be able to get a judge to court order your landlord to disclose this information. What is excluded from the CARES Act? So the moratorium only restricts filings of new cases. The federal eviction moratorium does not apply to cases that were filed before the moratorium took effect or that are filed after it sunsets. The moratorium only applies to non-payment cases, does not apply where the eviction is based on another reason besides non-payment of rent. Moratorium does not apply to buildings without federal financing. I am an HDFC shareholder and I can't pay my mortgage due to COVID-19 related loss of income. Does the CARES Act provide me with any mortgage relief? And my response to this is possibly. Borrowers should call the mortgage loan servicer to determine whether the mortgage is covered. But just reading the law itself under section 4022A2, the definition of a federally backed mortgage loan is as follows: any loan which is secured by a first or subordinate lien or residential real property, including individual units of condominiums and cooperatives, designed principally for the occupancy of from 1 to 4 families. So, so I interpreted that to include HDFC co-op shareholders. Clearly, this is what's in bold is language directly from the federal law. It says units of condominiums and cooperatives. Then federal foreclosure moratorium for 60-day period starting March 18th of 2020, servicers of federally backed mortgage loans may not start a foreclosure proceeding, move for a foreclosure judgment, order a sale, or conduct foreclosure-related eviction or foreclosure sale. And this is valid until May 18th of 2020. Then in terms of mortgage relief, Section 4022 of the CARES Act provides forbearance of up to 180 days or 6 months for borrowers with federally backed mortgage loans. With respect to multifamily buildings, that's under Section 4023. These owners can request 30 days of forbearance and can get extended up to a total of 90 days. So the next question is, what happens if an HDFC falls behind in its municipal charges, such as property taxes, water, etc., because shareholders cannot pay maintenance due to COVID-19 related loss of income? And so as already explained, there's currently a federal foreclosure moratorium under the CARES Act that applies to buildings with federally backed mortgages. But this provision of the act does not address municipal charges. And other than the information provided above, we're unaware of any New York State legislation which prevents collection of municipal charges. So I am not aware of any law that says that these buildings are excused from paying these charges. But again, the laws are frequently changing. There's not a lot or maybe any precedent. So that's another challenge. We don't have cases to rely on. We have only the statutes which have yet to be interpreted. New York State, let me go back. Next question is, does the 90-day mortgage relief announced by the governor, and that's Executive Order 202.9, apply to shareholders of HDFC units with unit level mortgages and or to HDFCs with underlying mortgages? So my answer to that question is, it depends. And I say again, call your mortgage loan provider, because ultimately you're going to have to call your mortgage loan provider if you want to make the request in the first place for any form of relief or forbearance. And your mortgage loan provider is going to also be able to tell you, they have a lot of discretion. They're going to be able to tell you what payment arrangements you're allowed to take advantage of, because they have discretion to determine that as well. But under Executive Order 202.9, it only applies to non-federally backed mortgages, and it only applies to New York State regulated banks, which is a very small percentage of mortgages. And I think the Senator mentioned that earlier. So my information is consistent. This executive order, very small percentage of mortgages are included under this executive order. And then with respect to HDFC co-ops, it's unclear whether co-op shareholders are covered as residential mortgage, because the term residential mortgage is not defined in the regulation. What I'll say is that the New York State Department of Financial Services does seem to intend for this to be covered. And, I have a link to the website where they suggest that co-ops may be covered, but there's no explicit reference to co-ops being covered. The executive order requires mortgage servicers to grant, subject to the safety and soundness of the regulated institution, forbearance for a period of 90 days to a borrower on a residential mortgage of a property located in New York, who resides in New York and who demonstrates financial hardship as a result of COVID-19. So pros and cons of mortgage relief, whether it's federal or state. Starting with the pros, the good thing is that during forbearance period, no fees, penalties, or interest can accrue on a borrower's account. Another good thing is that it appears that most people who are asking for mortgage forbearances, they appear to be obtaining the approvals. As an example, there are already over 4 million borrowers nationally who have been put on a CARES Act forbearance. Applicants shouldn't be asked too much information in the way of documentation. So, you do need to demonstrate, I think you just need to attest to the fact that you have a COVID-19 related loss of income, but shouldn't have to prove like you're in court with documentation and evidence that that you have financial hardship because of COVID-19. So those are all the pros that I see. Cons, the federal and state mortgage relief legislation doesn't erase mortgage obligation. It only defers your mortgage obligation. So in other words, your mortgage obligation is not canceled. Another con is that banks have discretion, and I said this earlier, to promulgate their own policies with respect to your payment arrangement after the expiration of the forbearance. So in theory, a borrower may be required to pay all back due arrears plus current month mortgage in one lump sum after the end of the forbearance. So to me, that's concerning, right? If you can't pay your mortgage now, in $1,000 a month increments, as an example, 4 months from now, chances are you're not going to be able to pay a lump sum of $4,000 all at once. So that is a serious pitfall of taking advantage of the mortgage relief under both federal and state legislation. Forbearance at both the federal and state level may be perceived as discretionary and may vary by bank or financial institution. So I know the executive order, it says that it doesn't have mandatory language. It has language that allows borrowers to make the request, but it doesn't say every financial institution shall grant such requests. So that's another possible concern. And so my last area is rent. Here's another common question that we get. I cannot afford to pay rent. What should I do? And the answer is, if you're a NYCHA tenant or you received Section 8 or any income-based subsidy and your income dropped, then there are a lot more options for you in terms of being able to get your rent readjusted. You should contact your subsidy provider so that they can lower your rent according to your zero income or your reduced income. For all other types of rental housing, you can try to negotiate a rent reduction with your landlord or discuss whether your rent payments can be suspended until the current situation is resolved. And so we have a lot of other websites and information. I can submit this to the board for more circulation. But if you have questions and you need some help in terms of public benefits, we have an access line. You can call us at 917-661-4500, and we can assist you with applying for public benefits, rental assistance, and the like. Is rent still owed to landlords? Yes, you still need to pay rent during this time. However, you cannot be evicted for not paying rent. Evictions are currently suspended until June 20th, 2020. There are efforts already being made to extend that date, but yes, the answer is there is no suspension of the obligation to pay rent. Pros and cons of participating in a rent strike. So first pro is by supporting a rent strike, you are supporting a statewide movement to pressure the legislature to cancel rents. And so many people may have heard of this #CancelRent campaign. Second pro is can advance efforts to modify landlord behavior on other building issues such as repairs and harassment, put economic pressure on landlords who will then support legislative efforts to act, shift the rent burden from tenants to landlords who can better afford the rent, build tenant power, collective power in buildings, potential to win, get rent canceled or lower, or to get a forbearance, create transactional costs and slow down court systems with landlords and their attorneys due to huge numbers of non-payment cases to process. So, basically I think the #CancelRent campaign, the purpose of it is to support legislation such as Senator Genaris's legislation, support the effort to respond. I think if you've listened to the presentation thus far, the legislation we currently have in place doesn't go far enough. It's not enough. it's not going to resolve all of your problems if you are having trouble paying the rent. And so more needs to be done. And this is a way to pressure the legislature and landlords to get more done for tenants who are struggling. Cons of participating in a rent strike. So if you participate in a rent strike, you don't pay your rent building-wide, you decrease the amount of money landlords have to make repairs. Rent strike target harms landlords who aren't necessarily ones who can create a solution. So in other words, small landlords, low-income housing providers, are also landlords, and they will be impacted by a canceled rent campaign or rent strike. Non-payment cases when courts reopen, threat of eviction, particularly because strike reasons are not a basis to get rent reduction. Negative effects of blacklisting if cases are brought. I mean, technically under the HSTPA, tenants shouldn't be concerned about blacklisting, but I guess I can talk about that at a later date. But the issue with the HSTPA is that is an issue of enforcement. Although landlords are not allowed, there might be loopholes that where they can continue to engage in behavior that is technically prohibited and unlawful. So this is a concern that we have for tenants who participate in these strikes. Potential for negative effects on credit reports, and many other concerns. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to David.
All right, thank you, Jerome, very much for that detailed response. We appreciate it, and he's going to stay with us, thankfully. So if there's a lot of time at the end, we will have him and Kevin answer additional questions that you may have that have been answered during that. But thank you again, Jerome, for that. I see that Gail Brewer is on and Senator Jackson is also on. I think we've allotted the next 20 minutes for the two of them. No unbiased, but we're going to start with Senator Jackson. He's been sitting there patiently to see if he can tell us a little bit about what's going on in Albany. And I'm sorry?
We can go with Gail.
Go with Gail. Okay, so we'll start with you, Gail. Sorry, I'll give you Senator Jackson. So Gail, we'll start with you and see what you have to say, and appreciate you taking the time here out of your busy schedule to attend this forum for us.
Senator Jackson was there first. Senator Jackson, don't you think you should go first? No, he won't go first. He's difficult. He's probably eating. Anyway, I have one quick story. RJ, you're sure? I mean, I'm not in a rush, so I'm
sure, Gail. Go ahead.
I could wait.
Chivalrous.
But I do have a good story. So I teach in Hunter, and one of the students lives in Brooklyn, and he calls me the other day and says, "Professor, I did what you told me. I organized my building. I met with all the residents. I think there's a small building in Brooklyn. And many of them are unemployed. They can't pay the rent. Now what do I do?" So anyway, I love that that kind of organizing is going on. And thank goodness for Community Board 9, Manhattan Legal Services, and all the amazing people. But we all have nightmares about health issues. We have nightmares about small business. I have a nightmare of June 21st being at 111 Center Street with everybody in line in court. And that's what we cannot do, or whatever date it is that has the end of this moratorium attached to it. So I am not voting on anything, but we've all tried to figure out what we can advise people. And certainly the first topic, everything should be on the table, as you heard earlier. With the Brooklyn Borough President and Councilmember Powers and Cornegie, we had the idea, and I don't know that it is the right one, but it was something obviously to take the security deposit and use it towards rent. Different people have different security deposits. Rent control tenants don't have anyone. So it's not perfect, but it was something that the mayor mentioned. Actually, the governor of New Jersey, I think, is considering it. That's one suggestion. And then, we all follow Furman Center and trying to see if they will think it's a good idea. They're looking at it, whether it makes sense or not. We're all concerned about the Rent Guidelines Board. We're all concerned about the Rent Guidelines Board for obvious reasons. Very few people can participate. It's online, but I haven't been to the Rent Guidelines Board meetings for the last 30 years Many of the participants are older, and I bet they cannot participate in a meaningful way. And so they are not. And so I just hope, and I said that in a letter, and we all have, I personally don't mind that they have meetings, but absolutely 0% increase. And I heard a different number recently, and I just hope that they come to their senses. There's no way that it could be anything but 0%. Robert Jackson can talk much more eloquently than I can about what's going on in Albany. I do think that Senator Kavanaugh's bill that talked about vouchers is one way to get the rent paid for those who are unemployed and, you know, who are just struggling with unemployment insurance, probably kids in the, you know, that you have to teach as a parent, and the list goes on and on. And you've got rent, you've got utilities. We have the same problem. I know this isn't the topic, but for the commercial, every single store, every single small mom and pop is calling all of us. So whether it is whatever bill that comes out of Albany, I know the small owners are concerned about their mortgage also, and that's also on the tip of focus in terms of all the elected officials. So I've also been on so many Zoom discussions today, as you have, both with Congressman Nadler, Congressman Espaillat, and others. And it appears that, you know, we all have dealing with stimulus 3, stimulus 4, you know, the things that they don't cover. I don't need to get into the list because you know it, but if there is something called the Emergency Rental Assistance and Rental Market Stabilization Act, I would consider that stimulus 5, but that's not what it's called. And whatever billions is attached to it, my understanding is that this $100 billion in emergency rental assistance, that's kind of the number that the folks in the Senate are talking about, at least, that's where some funding would come from. It has to come, I think, from Washington. Whether that passes or not, I don't know. I know that it would also include not money for the MTA and not money for NYCHA, but it would include funding for operational also for state and for city. That's apparently in the proposal. Nothing has passed. And I think, you know, the fact of the matter is that every single opportunity, you know, we'll also be talking about one shots every time we ask the commissioner of the Department of Homeless Services and Human Services in the city of New York, Steve Banks. We ask about one shots, and of course, because there's a moratorium, they're not being advanced at this moment. But we have to make sure the one shots work, that they are clear, that because there are people who are going to be applying who've not dealt with the one shot challenge in the past. Those of us who've been in this constituent support world for a long time know exactly how one shots work. But that would be another place where we have to make sure that people are ready to be able to get those funds. So I don't have any magic bullet except between Albany and Washington. We cannot stand on June 21st or June 20th at 111 Center Street and see a long line. I don't want to see anybody there. And I do know that, you know, already owners are being challenging to individual residents. We're all getting those calls. We even got them during the worst of the horrible virus. So I'm here to be supportive, to listen. I know that April Adams is on also. We try to answer every single phone call as everybody else in elected office does. And thank you very much. And thank you, Manhattan Legal Services, for being there, and all the elected officials who've made sure that you have the funding to be able to do the great work that you do. And I know that we work a lot with Alcia and everybody at Palente, because they too, particularly during this horrible time when people were really, really challenged health-wise and otherwise, have been really good to the residents of Community Board 9. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you so much. And thank you for keeping your office open as you are and being on the front lines as always. We appreciate that. And thank you for taking your time out of your day today to speak with us. Senator Jackson, are you ready to say something, or do you want me to move on to something?
Ready
Ready to
anytime
go.
you are. I mean,
As always ready to go.
first, let me thank you and the various land use, housing, and zoning committee for pulling this together, not only for the public, but also as elected public officials. Because I was listening to the supervising attorney, I believe his name is Jerome Ferguson, and he's so knowledgeable that we need to have him go everywhere, or other attorneys like him, so that everyone, and no matter what language they speak, will be able to know what their rights are, and what Manhattan Legal Services what they do for the community overall. So let me just thank you for bringing this all together. And obviously, you had Mike Gianaris on earlier, and as he indicated, him and I were part of the COVID-19 housing work group for 2 hours before we came to you. But what I say to you, if you don't know, these are the 8 members, 9 members of the state Senate that are members of the COVID-19 housing work group. They are obviously Brian Kavanaugh is the chair of the housing committee in the state Senate, and he's chairing this committee. But you have Jessica Ramos from Queens, Luis Sepulveda from the Bronx, Rachel May from Syracuse, Mike Gianaris from Queens, Andrew Gernardis from Brooklyn, Jen Metzer from Rockland, Ulster County area, Jim Gorin from Long Island, Brian Benjamin obviously from Manhattan, and myself. And Brian is, besides being on our committee, he is the chair of the Revenue Committee, the COVID-19 Revenue Committee, that the 2 various committees that has been established by our leader, Andrew Stewart-Cousins, in order to address the emergency situations brought about by COVID-19. So that's what we have been doing. We've met 3 times already, or the 4th time, and going over not only as it relates to tenants, but also homeowners and the situations that they face also. We also raised the issue of addressing small businesses, and also dealing with utilities. Normally, if people can't pay their rent or can't pay their mortgage, they're going to have problems with paying for the utilities. And in fact, it was reported that at least upstate near Buffalo area, some people, their lights and gas have been cut off already. So obviously, these are the things that we're looking at in order to come to agreement, a consensus, so that we can make our recommendations to the Democratic conference, and there's 40 Democrats in our conference. And the same thing with the Revenue Committee, they're going to do the same thing. But what I've said in the committee, and I say to all of you, so we're going to come up with our recommendations, hopefully like immediately or soon thereafter. The conference will be like one on whatever we agree to, and then the assembly has to come on board, because basically you're talking about passing legislation, and many of you know from a process point of view, both the assembly and Senate have to come together on the bills. They have to be exactly the same in order to send to the governor for approval and sign off and make it into law, especially dealing with this emergency situation. And what I've said to my colleagues, and I say to you, you know, we can talk, but taking action is what our people are expecting. And so as Mike Gianaris said, and I've also advocated, that we must get this done before June 1st comes about, because April 1st has already passed. May 1st has already passed. The next due date for at least rental people is June 1st. So that's what has to be done. And as someone said, we must, I think Brian Benjamin said this, we must walk and chew gum at the same time. And I'm sure that you've heard that saying. And someone has said that from Indivisible Harlem earlier on a meeting that I was in with, that we must deal with this. This is not the Hunger Games budget process. So that's why what Gail said and what Michael said, we need federal money, federal stimulus in order to address this situation. And hopefully that will be soon. Hopefully that will give us the relief that we need. But also we are looking at raising revenues. And where do we raise revenues from? Initially, we have more billionaires and millionaires in New York City than anywhere else in the world. And obviously that's what we're going to be looking at in order to help to ask our billionaires and millionaires to give us some assistance in helping all of New Yorkers. That can bring billions and billions of dollars. And as you know, the Fiscal Policy Institute has a lot of other recommendations. So I would assume that all of the revenue work group is addressing that to bring forward. But some people have asked the question, okay, so what if we pull together some legislation for renters and people for mortgage relief and for utilities? And both the Assembly and the Senate agree, and we send it to the governor, and the governor does not want to go along with it, okay? I hope we come to something and he agrees with us and sign it into immediate law right away. But if not, in my opinion, we must still go forward and put it on his plate that he has to accept it or reject it. Obviously, we don't want him to reject it. I know that the Assembly has 107 Democrats that have enough to override a governor's veto, but the New York State Senate does not have enough to override a veto, not unless we come with several Republicans that will vote with us. And we hope that that never comes to pass where we have to override a governor's veto. But if so, then that's what we're gonna have to do. We're gonna have to organize to make legislation that impacts the people during this pandemic emergency. So that's what's happening overall. And there are many bills, not only one or two that was discussed earlier, but there are quite a number of housing bills. And hopefully that we will come up with one within the work group to be able to recommend to the full conference. And even the ones that we recommend may be amended. But I talked to April Tyler earlier and the issue and concern about the piece in Salazar's bill. And obviously, let me just say this to you and to everyone else, that if that's not resolved and that has to be taken out, if in fact we go with that bill, then so be it. I am not going to vote on anything that's going to negatively impact the HDFCs and force them into a regulatory agreement. This is about giving relief to everyone that has been negatively impacted by the pandemic. And that's what the goals and objectives are. And that's what I'm focusing on as someone, as a state senator from the 31st Senatorial District, which represents part of Marble Hill, all of Inwood, majority all of Washington Heights, the West Harlem, Hamilton Heights area, and then go to the Upper West Side, the Midtown, all the way to Chelsea, 2060 to 9th Avenue, 13 miles. The most regulated units of regulated apartments in the entire state of New York is in my 31st Senatorial District. And that's what I'm there to fight for. And so I'm not going to try to do anything I can in my power to hurt any of the people that are my constituents. So with that, David, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to come in front of you. And I'm going to stay around because I enjoy listening to the various community boards in their meetings. And so this is one of the committee meetings, and I plan on staying around and listening.
Thank you, Robert Jackson. Thank you so much. And we always love to have you here. It's always a pleasure. Pleasure's all on this side of the community board. So with that, I think it's, let's see, we're actually right on schedule. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Duffy Greaves, who's at Manhattan Legal Services. He's going to talk about some other areas of expertise.
All right. Thanks for having me. My name's Kevin Duffy Greaves. I'm a staff attorney at Manhattan Legal Services. I work with Jerome on doing defensive eviction work representing tenants out of Manhattan Housing Court. And I'm also a resident of CB9 myself. So I will share my screen now. Okay. So Jerome's presentation focused more on what's going on at the federal level and more mortgage foreclosure, homeowner kind of stuff. Mine focused a little bit more on what's happening state and local level, and focus a little bit more on tenants, but it jumps around to, it's kind of a smattering of topics that I was told that folks in CB9 are interested in. So let's jump in. So we've touched on the state eviction moratorium a bit already. And the most basic question is no, you cannot be evicted right now during this period. It started on March 16th. It was for 90 days. This means that no new cases can be filed, no evictions can take place. And so right now that lasts through June 20th, and it's very possible that could be extended farther. It's, as President Brewer said earlier, it's very hard to imagine anybody showing up at Housing Court on June 21st right now. And of course, as touched on earlier by Jerome, you know, your situation could be also affected by the federal eviction moratorium, so you should speak with an attorney if you've got a specific question. Okay. So we're getting a lot of questions about what's going on with housing courts. So the housing courts are closed, but there's some exceptions with that. So what do you do if you've got a pending case? What's going on right now? Do you still have to go to your court date? No. So right now, all pending non-essential matters, including eviction proceedings, have been postponed. Up to about now, people have been receiving postcards in the mail with their new court dates. They've usually been about 30, 45, 60 days adjourned out. So I had a number of cases adjourned out until June already. But the scheduling of new court dates is not as happening as much anymore, and that's just because the court staff doesn't have the administrative ability right now to actually even be rescheduling court dates. So it's possible if you have a court date, say, scheduled for May 15th right now, you might not get in the mail a new postcard, or it might not show up on the eCourts website, which you can also check to see your upcoming court dates. That do not show up to court on May 15th. Doesn't mean courts are open, doesn't mean that your case is happening. Unfortunately, the courts just don't have the ability to even send you a postcard right now with your new date. So that said, the courts are taking some steps to do what some people have called a soft reopening. And it is not an exaggeration to say that this is changing day by day. My slide, which was finalized yesterday, is already out of date. On Monday, we had a call with the landlord-tenant bar, so landlords' attorneys, tenants' attorneys, and we spoke with some of the housing court judges here in Manhattan, and they said that they are working on a process that some pending cases where both sides are represented by an attorney and on consent of both parties, so that means if either side said, I don't want to be here, case doesn't go forward, but that they are starting to do some arguments by phone, taking new motions, as long as those cases are fully submitted and doing arguments and decisions. That was Monday. That's what we heard from Judge Katz, one of the housing court judges in Manhattan. On Tuesday, just yesterday, Chief Judge Canataro issued a administrative order, or directive, and that said that not only situations where both parties are represented by lawyers, but also there might be cases where unrepresented litigants are going to be required to respond to motions. This threw us totally for a loop. We've been hearing from the housing court judges so far, all the way up through Monday, that it was only going to be cases where both parties are represented by an attorney, that some cases might move forward. And so there's now tenants organizations and legal services are meeting furiously to coordinate a response since we weren't expecting this. Basically, the court has a new electronic document system where you can submit new motions and how you can respond to motions. And they say, as long as the new directive from Judge Canataro says, as long as you've been properly served your new motion, unrepresented litigants also will be expected to respond to motions at this point. So if you happen to be one of these people that you don't have an attorney and you actually get served a motion by a landlord's attorney, call Lisney. Jerome shared the number earlier. I've got a slide at the end later too. If you get a motion at this time from a landlord's attorney, talk to a lawyer. You can also call 311, ask for HRA every day, and a different legal services provider in Manhattan staffs a HRA hotline intake, and so you can speak with an attorney. If you've got specific questions about we don't know though, when is housing court going to actually reopen? We have no idea. We don't know when it's going to be business as usual. There's no date on the horizon. The best way to check for updates on that, you can call Manhattan Housing Court. I would say try to keep that line free if you can. That's that 646 number right there. Best thing to do is to go to nycourts.gov or to call 311. Touching on NYCHA briefly. So likewise, NYCHA's not doing any administrative hearings right now. They're not doing any termination hearings. They're closed just like housing court. And if somebody's already been terminated by NYCHA and their case has now gone on to housing court, obviously housing court's closed. Those cases aren't moving forward either. Obviously, a lot of people are having their income change right now. I would really, really strongly encourage any NYCHA tenants to do an interim recertification and to make sure that you're paying the right rent share. And so that's anybody, if you've lost just 5% of your income or more, you qualify to do an interim income recertification, or if your rent now exceeds 30% of your income. The best way to go do that is that selfserve.nycha.info website there, or you can visit your management office. Touched on this already a little bit. How will I know if you have a pending housing court matter? How do you know when your court date, when it's going to be adjourned to you? Generally, they've been sending postcards to tenants. I've heard from a couple of my clients that they haven't gotten a postcard in the mail and they've waited until I called them because I got the new date online. But as I said before, the scheduling is kind of intermittently happening or not happening right now, but just know that court's closed, and if you have an upcoming court date, it's not happening. And again, if you have questions about your specific case, just have your index number ready, and then you can call the Manhattan Housing Court on their emergency line there, and they do have somebody staffing that line every day, and they can help you answer questions. Again, don't know when courts are going to reopen, and we don't know how they're going to reopen whenever that does finally happen. There is sort of the soft reopening of doing some virtual remote appearances. But whenever the actual building opens up again, the housing court judges have mentioned to us that they probably will do some sort of a phase-in where only certain types of cases will be heard, or only certain zip codes will be in court each day in order to, maintain better social distancing and have less people in court. In normal times, upwards of 2,000 people a day can go into Manhattan Housing Court. And obviously that is not fathomable at this point. And whenever courts do reopen, we just don't know what there's going to be a new normal in terms of what case timelines look like. The backlog will be unprecedented. That's why the housing court judges are trying to deal with their current cases as best they can right now, because they're already stressed about the backlog that they're going to have. Whereas a non-payment case, might be a few months long. It's probably going to be way, way, way longer than that now. Adjournments aren't going to be 4 to 6 weeks like they used to be. And again, for updates on courts reopening, call 311 or visit the newyorkcourts.gov website there. And so I said housing court is closed, but it is slightly open for essential or emergency matters right now. So what types of cases are still being heard? What types of cases are emergency or essential? So evictions aren't essential. So those aren't happening right now. They can't file new eviction cases. But essential applications include what we call HP cases. Those are cases for repairs. So those are cases tenants actually bring against their landlords in order to get repairs in their apartments. These cases, we'll go into more detail later about which kind of repairs actually are going to be allowed to be have a case brought. They have to be fairly severe, but we'll go into that later. The second type of case that can happen right now are illegal lockouts. So if your landlord comes and just changes the locks on you, that's illegal. Your first step should be to call the police. The police can oftentimes let you back into the apartment much faster than any court process can. But failing that, you can call LISNY again, or you can call HRA 311, or you can call Manhattan Housing Court and get information about how to start an emergency application in Manhattan Housing Court to get back into your apartment right away. The last type of case that can be that's in housing court right now are post-eviction cases. I won't go into that because those aren't really happening. Those are people that were actually legally evicted before the moratorium went into place. Obviously, we're deep into the moratorium now, and those aren't really a thing. So in each borough right now, one courtroom is open every day, and a judge rotates through. So they're open Monday through Friday. You can call. There is a clerk there, 646-386-5730. So if you have questions about your upcoming case, if you're not getting your upcoming court date, you have questions about that, you can give them a call. Or if you were illegally locked out of your apartment, or if you're wondering if you're how to start an HP action for emergency repairs, you can call that number and get information about how to do that. And right now, the judge that's actually in the part each day, we're told is handling sometimes just a handful of cases. So I've noticed that they definitely actually have some capacity to take calls and answer your questions at this time. So I touched on this just before. So what are the emergency repairs that you can actually get into court for right now? So if your landlord's refusing to do repairs in your apartments, what do? Basically, the court's only going to help you with immediately hazardous conditions. So what is immediately hazardous? Those are water leaks, gas leaks, local power issues, and other kinds of electrical issues, fire hazards. If Department of Buildings has issued some sort of a vacate order in your unit, that would also qualify. You know, this is a lot more like broken toilet than it is touching up the paint. But if you have questions about that, again, feel free to call the LISNY hotline and we can work through it with you and see if you can maybe bring an HP action. You can always, I always tell people too, you should be calling 311 if your landlord's refusing to make repairs in your apartment. You should be calling 311 to report those issues, those housing code violations. DOB is still doing, or HPD and DOB, both of them are doing inspections in units right now for immediately hazardous conditions. So do that. And, but of course, also when you're making an appointment with your landlord, or you're planning, or you're asking a court to have repairs done in your apartment, you also need to be thinking about how this is going to be done with social distancing rules, maintaining social distance guidelines, right? So who's going to be in the apartment? Are, you know, how's the work going to be done so that it's safely done? Okay. So how do you file an application for emergency repairs right now? The best way to do it is to go to justfix.nyc, and the folks there have built a really great tool where they've helped that they'll help you file a case. Barring that, if you're not comfortable doing it online, Second best thing you can do is call one of these two numbers here. These are the Housing Court COVID hotline numbers, and you can explain your issue and how you want to start an HP action. Normally, you would go down to Housing Court and fill out a petition and serve it on the landlord. But obviously, they're not letting tenants in the building to do that right now. So you need to call that number or go to justfix.nyc in order to start that. Also, you can always, I would also recommend calling either LISNY or the HRA housing hotline 311 to see if they can help you as well. Yeah, do this. Okay. Another topic I was asked to cover is about lease renewals. So folks are worried that because of the current situation that they're not going to be offered maybe their normal lease renewal, or that their rent's going to be raised. So we'll dive into that. Basically, the answer is that nothing's changed in this realm. So it just depends on what kind of apartment you live in. So if you live in a rent stabilized apartment and your lease is set to expire soon, just like normal, your landlord's supposed to send you at least 90 days before the expiration of your lease, they're supposed to send you an offer of lease renewal with 1 and 2 year lease term options. And if they fail to do that, DHCR is still open, and you can submit a complaint to DHCR. The link is there. That's really the only way to do it, is to fill out that form and send it in. DHCR response times are glacial, even in the best of times. And I can't imagine that they're any better now. So just keep that in mind. But if they're not offering you a lease renewal and you're in a rent stabilized apartment, just know that nothing bad can happen. There's no reason they can start a case against you anyways. We're in an eviction moratorium. Even if they wanted to bring a case against you for something frivolous, they literally can't file a case right now. And if they're not offering you a lease renewal, it means that they can't raise your rent by whatever the permitted rent guideline board increase amount is either. So you'll just continue to pay what you were on your last lease term. So maybe you'll save a little bit of money. That said, obviously, it's best to have a lease renewal and have an active lease. So you can still have that process of submitting a complaint to DHCR if they're not doing that. However, if you live in a market rate apartment, you are not rent stabilized and your lease is expiring, unfortunately, just like before, you still don't have any rights to the lease renewal. The only thing that's different is because we're in an eviction moratorium, if you want to stay in the apartment during as long as that moratorium is in place, your landlord can't take any action against you. As Jerome said earlier, that rent will keep accruing as long as you're in the apartment, but they can't take any, they can serve a notice of termination, which is a predicate notice that says that they intend to start a case, but it does not mean that a case is started against you. So, and they can't start a case against you at this time. Unfortunately, so the expanded right that you have, I guess, right now as a market rate apartment is just, you can stay as long as the eviction moratorium is in place, but that's the extent of the right now. We're also getting a lot of questions from folks that are interested in wanting to know how to break a lease or what's surrounding that. So this just changed a little bit. So thanks to the HSTPA that passed last year, landlords now have to make a good faith effort to re-rent your apartment if you leave the apartment before the end of your lease. You are still on the hook for all the rent during the time that the landlord is making those good faith efforts to re-rent your apartment, but they do have to, post on StreetEasy and try. So the best thing to do, though, is if you're planning on breaking your lease, is to reach out to the landlord and directly negotiate with them and let them know. Because right now, the unofficial word from the landlord attorney world is that landlords are generally accepting about 2 or 3 months of rent, and they'll let you out of the rest of your lease, and everybody will just walk away and be done with it. That doesn't mean that that's true. That will be true with your landlord, but this is the word from a number of landlords attorneys who represent larger landlords in Manhattan. So that's sort of just like a rule of thumb or a guideline if you're thinking about doing that. So maybe if you can't come up with 2 to 3 months of rent or whatever it is that you would negotiate for breaking your lease, what are the consequences of just leaving and owing the money? Well, courts are closed. The landlord's going to have to wait until the courts reopen to sue you for some a money judgment. And since you have vacated the apartment, this case won't be in housing court. So it shouldn't appear on any tenant blacklist. As we know, there shouldn't be a tenant blacklist anymore, but if there was one, it wouldn't show up on there because it's not in housing court. And it shouldn't show up on your credit report either, thanks to a 2017 federal law that passed as well. That said, it's never fun to have a money judgment against yourself, so just have that in mind. Roommate rights. So a lot of people are living with roommates, of course, and just sort of like the market rate rules, nobody can be forced to leave their apartment at this time, even if you don't have a formal sublease or agreement going on. If you've lived in an apartment, whatever the situation, for at least 30 days, that person has at least licensee rights to the apartment and needs to be, if they're going to be evicted, it has to be done through a court process. And as we've gone over many times, there's no evictions going on right now. So you're stuck. If there's a safety issue, of course, call the police. And if you're on the other side of it and your roommate that doesn't like you locks you out, that's an illegal lockout. If you've been there for at least 30 days, you have rights to be back into the apartment. You should call LISNY, call 311. That's an illegal lockout, and you should get information on how to start an emergency case in housing court to get back into the apartment immediately. And don't think about locking anybody out right now if you're thinking about it. All right. Okay, the last thing here is essential versus non-essential construction. So some people are wondering about construction that's going on in their building. So the Department of Buildings has, the rule right now is that non-essential construction is banned for social distancing purposes. But of course, some essential construction still has to go on. So what's the difference right now? Essential construction includes at least emergency work that the Department of Buildings itself orders. That's definitely going to be covered. That has to still go on. Anything that covers an essential service. So if it's construction that's affecting heat, hot water, cold water, gas, electricity, or some other kind of utility, that's also going to be permitted. It also seems the elevator, door locking, so front door or your own door, and some types of facade work are also considered essential. Anything related to a transit facility, if there's a bus stop in front of your place or something. Again, utilities, healthcare facilities, educational facilities, affordable public housing. If there's an essential business on the first floor of your apartment building and they are having work done. And here's the really important one, construction where a single person is on site. So if your super is touching up the paint in the stairwell by himself, that's probably okay. But what you can always do if you're not sure, if it seems like a violation, you're not sure if what you're seeing is a violation, just call 311. Describe what you're seeing, say that you'd like to make a complaint to DOB about non-essential construction going on in your apartment building. They are still doing inspections for this kind of stuff, and they might be able to send somebody out there and see if a violation is occurring. That's all I got. This is a list of all the important numbers that were in this presentation. I bet CB9 will send this out so that you've got this, but that's all I've got. I think we're ready for questions.
Yeah, so we're going to try to, I'm not sure exactly how, but we will definitely disseminate that PowerPoint presentation by both you and Jerome. Kevin, thank you very much again for taking the time. You made a lot of sense of a lot of confusing areas that all of us, and I've had many questions asked to me, and a lot of them were answered in that very, very brief but yet thorough presentation. So thank you again. So I guess if there's any questions, and, obviously we still have the Senator Jackson and our President Gail Brewer. So if anybody has any questions related to that, obviously we'd like to address those first to consider their time. But also we have Jerome and Kevin still on for any legal questions. So I don't know, April, if you had any questions or anything, or if anybody wants to ask any questions, then we can do this from now. April?
Yeah, I think I was unmuted. I was muted.
Yeah.
I'm looking through the questions, and first, let me just I don't know if she's still on here, but thank you. Our call, and thanks for Robert Jackson and the other elected officials who helped to put this together. We thank you very much for your support, and we know that CB9 is like, yeah, we're kick-ass. We know that. All right, so questions. The only question that I had that had not been answered during the discussion was if their lease is expected to expire during the moratorium.
Right. I'm reading Tiffany's question there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, your landlord
Yeah.
can't just
I don't
say.
think that's relevant, really.
Well, I can answer it really
Go
quick. I
ahead.
mean, if your landlord can't just come in and say the rent is now $50,000 a month and you're on the hook for that. The rent is what you agree it to be, right? And so,
Right.
so that, yeah. So no.
If you do not have a rent regulated lease and a rent regulated rent, then whatever you negotiate with the landlord is the rent that you pay.
Right. I mean, if your rent was $2,000 a month before in a market rate apartment and you're staying because of the eviction moratorium, that's what it's going to continue to accrue at.
Right.
Well, April, April, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, and so I really wanted to hear, I guess, the question, even though, what's his name, Kevin answered it. But if, for example, obviously, if someone is paying $3,500 a month, let's say, for example, my question is, do they have a lease? If they have a lease for 1 year or whatever it is, then you have a contract. If there's no lease, then obviously the landlord can say $3,500 1 month, $2,000 the next month, $6,000 the next month. You know what I mean? But the question is there a lease, and how long is the lease for? And that lease is a contract.
If they lease for a year, it's a lease for a year. If they have a lease for a month, it's a lease for a month. If they have a verbal contract, it's questionable. So if someone's, if I say, oh, Robert, let me come stay in your house and live for, I'll give you like $100 for a bedroom to stay in your house for a month, and that's a verbal contract, negligible. But maybe a contract, but if you got it in writing, it's a contract.
Right. I want to respond to this question because I actually had a case on this exact issue where one of my clients, she had a lease, rent was $2,000 per month, that lease expired, and then landlord brought her to court after expiration seeking several months or maybe a year or more of rent, saying that she owed rent at $2,000 per month. She was in court by the time I got to the case, owed $80,000 according to the landlord in rent. I was able to get the case completely dismissed, $80,000 non-pay dismissed on motion for summary judgment because there was no lease in effect. So because there was no lease, there was no contract,
No written lease.
no written lease in effect. The judge dismissed the case in its entirety because
Right.
you have to have a lease
Hey,
under those circumstances.
Jerome, I guess the question that it begs the question to ask is, if in fact the lease expired, let's say $2,000 a month, how did in fact this landlord allege that the tenant owed $80,000? How is that? Because in essence, did it take that long to go to court? And basically he was going to let's say charge whatever he wants to charge, or what?
Oh, so no, if the existing agreement was $2,000, that was the agreement. And the landlord can't just arbitrarily say,
Right.
we're going to increase the amount
Right.
without another written agreement.
And that I understand.
Right. So the right thing for the landlord to do is bring a holdover case, not a non-payment case. A holdover
Yeah.
case based upon
No,
lease-
no, but just in terms of contracts, like,
What I'm saying is, if they want to
lawyer,
recover possession of the apartment, then they have to bring a holdover case. If they want to recover.
no, no, but just in terms of contracts, lawyer, like, back me up.
No, so in terms of contracts, the landlord needed to have a contract in place.
Right.
Right.
In order to
So
collect
that,
rent.
like, the landlord has to have a contract that says that you're not paying $2,000 anymore, you're paying $5,000 now,
Right.
and
Right.
here's a new contract. If
Right.
there's no new contract,
I'm
the
with
old
you.
contract stands.
Exactly. But they
That's
need
why I wanted to know from Jerome, since you handled that case legally, representing that tenant, what was the logic and reasoning for the landlord to say this tenant owed now $80,000? It's absurd, in my opinion.
exactly. I'm there. I'm there. I'm with you. And the judge is with us as well, and that's why she dismissed the case. Yeah.
Very good.
I started answering a few of the questions that I saw on chat, so I can just go over those really quickly.
Yeah.
I wrote my answers, but I can just read them aloud. So one question was, what about homeowners who do not have a mortgage? And so my response is, as discussed, courts are currently closed except for emergency applications. So no new cases will likely move forward. Unfortunately, we're not aware of any legislation that provides any long-term protections for homeowners in this scenario. But we do primarily housing. If you want more specific legal advice regarding this situation, please call my office at 646-442-3100.
Rome, I think that we're going to ask you to come to one of our meetings to speak specifically about some HDFC issues.
Sure.
All right.
He already agreed. He's been doing a lot of more research and putting together a package internally.
Right.
So he's already prepared. I mean, our conversations earlier this week, he's preparing some things internally and is going to disseminate that information to us in a group, hopefully, specifically on HDFCs.
Okay, great.
So another question is there anything we can do as constituents to help get something passed? And so I covered this in my discussion on the pros and cons of participating.
So here's what I say to them. We are in full support of 8125 Senate bill. And we are in support of 8109 or 09, the Salazar bill, with the to sign regulatory agreements. I do not support giving away my inheritance and my rights, my property rights to my grandchildren. I do not.
It's freezing up her connection.
40 years from now for temporary assistance, where everyone else gets assistance free and clear.
But April, you heard what I had to say on that. As far
Yes.
as
And thank you, Robert.
But
And
I think
Robert
everybody's
is
going to clear that up.
a
I don't.
stalwart supporter of us.
Yeah, this is about helping everyone and not negatively impacting a certain group of homeowners or co-op owners or anything else. This is about help during this pandemic.
And Madam Borough President, we thank you for your support too. And we
Well,
do
thank-
not-
Don't worry about it, April. We'll figure it out later. We
Yeah.
do not think that, because Black and brown people are now owning property and doing things with property.
Right. I think, why is it that only HDFCs would have to sign a 40-year regulatory agreement when renters and homeowners who aren't HDFC owners and others would get assistance without it? I think that everybody is pretty unified on the idea that doesn't make sense, and those provisions need to be removed from Senator Salazar's bill. And I'm very happy that Senator Jackson has spoken out about making sure that happens. And we will be following up, I'm sure, with our other state elected officials to make sure that they are up to speed on that provision and that it gets taken out. Are there any other questions that folks have for either the attorneys or our borough president or our state senator? If you don't mind, I would just like to take a moment to once again thank and give a big virtual round of applause to David Hansel for bringing this all together, for our panelists, including State Senators Gianaris and Jackson, Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, and of course the incomparable Jerome Frierson, and as well as, don't let me forget, Kevin Duffy Greaves, who did a fantastic job really getting into the nitty gritty.
Thank you.
And I also want to take a moment to thank Youtha Prince, our Community Board 9 District Manager, and Ray McLaughlin for making sure that all the trains came and went on time and for helping us out. We would not be anywhere without the help of our board office staff. And also to thank April and Signe as the co-chairs of the Housing Land Use Committee for helping make this happen. I want to maybe then just turn it over to David for kind of the closing parts of the forum.
Okay. Yeah. No, thank you, Barry. And I know you're locked in like all of us, and appreciate the time out to join us as well. But yeah, again, I couldn't have pulled together any of this without all of your assistance and support. It's a team effort, and I'm glad that we got some information. And like I said, we'll the Facebook Live didn't seem to be working technically, so we did record the Zoom recording, so I will figure a way to get it posted on Facebook. Work with Youtha and Ray to make sure that happens, as well as work with Ray and Kevin. I'm sorry, with Kevin and Jerome to get out their PowerPoint presentations, as well as make all the contact information readily available if there's any questions for anybody that is a lot of information. So that you can look at in your leisure and you can rewatch and see and go through the PowerPoint. But again, thank you everybody for taking the time out tonight. And I think there's a lot more where we have to go, but at least this gives us a little direction and a little understanding of what's going on. And I think it was a very constructive forum. And I thank all of you to take the time and to attend as well. I want to thank the attendees that are watching from home and staying safe. So, thank you very much. I guess that's where I should close it out and say thank you again.
Can you not leave before, let me just say a couple of words.
Okay.
Thank you, David, so much for putting this all together. You would like yeoman's work. With respect for Walter, sorry for no pizza.
Yeah. Oh.
But But I am so happy that this happened, and this is a mark for not just our Housing, Land Use, and Zoning Committee, but for all of our committees and all of the forums that we will put together in the future. And I thank you. And thank you, Madam Borough President. Thank you, State Senator Robert Jackson, for being here, and Jerome. And I forget Kevin. Thank you. Like, wow. That was great. The information that you relayed, and I'm glad that we've captured it, and we're gonna make sure that it gets out to the community. Thank you so much, all of you, and thank you, Barry, for.
She froze again.
I was at the right point. You freeze. Thank
Oh
you
my
for.
God, Sydney! I cannot live without Signe, and I always forget to thank her. But thank you, Signe, for being there. For being there.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your night. Stay safe.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to close out the meeting now. Thank you for joining us.